Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In answer to some of the other questions, you provided an adequate defense. The trouble is, we have seen the abuses of government. We have seen the gathering of data. And I can tell you from having been here, not when the Patriot Act was passed originally, but when it was extended back in my first term in Congress, it got down to where there were only 2 Republicans demanding any type of safeguard, I thought, and there were 2 of us that wanted sunsets. I was the one that argued for 25 minutes in our 30-minute pre-hearing meeting demanding sunsets, and then my friend Dan Lunger had the amendments, and we got at least 2 sunsets on 206 and 215. And the argument I made for 25 minutes that turned my colleagues, Republicans, around in our meeting was, I've seen how there can be violations of due process if everyone is not very diligent. And we need the safeguards in order to have proper oversight. And what we've seen and what's been disclosed of the monitoring scares me. We've had hearings in this room. People like Jerry Nadler have argued about dangers of government having too much information. And from my experience as a judge and Chief Justice with state judges and federal judges, and having practiced before a very conservative federal judge named Bill Steger and a very liberal judge named William Wayne Justice, I couldn't imagine anybody granting the kind of orders we've now seen granted. Just a blanket summary, go get all of these phone records. And I understand the assurances, no, we don't have names with them, but isn't it true that you can go on public or private data, any individual, and secure the names for different numbers? Isn't that true?
There are ways to secure the names for any number of numbers, maybe not every single one.
Right, and I recall back in 2002, as a Chief Justice at a conference, getting into a debate with a CIA lawyer who was arguing, look, banks have all your financial records, why shouldn't the government? And I was pointing out, as he said, conservative. It's because banks can't show up at your house, put you in handcuffs, throw you to the ground, and drag you off to jail, which has been done by the government. So there is an important distinction. And then we find out that though many of us opposed it, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has been gathering information on everybody's financial records. But they say the same thing that most of you are saying. Look, we're not putting the names with it. But isn't it true that that even the NSA can get access to the information gathered by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau?
Sir, I imagine that could be true, but I would say that we can't pull the telephone numbers from this database under any circumstances other than that prescribed by the courts.
But you're entitled to go. I mean, we've had this debate in here. You're entitled to go on the internet or go to private sources that any private citizen could and gather that information without violating any constitutional rights. Isn't that correct?
Certainly, but if the premise is we would do that to match names, identification, personal information against the telephone numbers, we don't have access to the telephone numbers unless we follow the prescribed rules of the court pursuant to a terrorism investigation.
But if you can gather the information that a private individual could and couple that with information that only the federal government, we're now learning, is gathering, then it really constitutes a grave threat to privacy. By the way, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau said this. Their director said this in testimony before Congress. The Bureau has also issued regulations that limit the circumstances in which it may disseminate internally, share with other agencies, or disclose the public confidential information. Share with other agencies. So they know they can share with other agencies if another agency or they feel it's helpful. This begins to be a little scary, and the justification we get seems to be, well, but look, there are a handful of cases where we have avoided terrorism by really gathering all this private information, and it makes me think, how many times could King George III have argued that? Look, by putting officers in every one of your homes that we were uncomfortable with, we ended up being able to avoid a couple of problems of violence. We don't want people in our homes, and that includes the federal government watching through a big eye through our computers. And I appreciate your being here today. Thank you.